German, so I
Yeah,
don't know where
and
he
then
goes.
they don't see, they might not even be aware where it's coming from.
Because
after
it's that
01.
guy's
Hello, Larry. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I am currently a mystery man, but I will walk into the camera. All right. Well, we see you perfectly.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes. Very well. Very well.
Is okay?
Yeah. My name is Forrest Wolf. We've had contact over email.
Right.
Could you share your PowerPoint? And then
Let's see. All right. Let me try that right now. You see it?
yeah. You're sharing your screen. That's
Right.
this is. Could you make it full screen, the PowerPoint?
Yeah, let me see if I can find the full screeny. Oh, never mind. That's, I'm so stupid. There it is. Haha.
Perfect. Perfect. This looks really good.
You haven't been hypnotized yet by the picture. I've worked 3 weeks to get the hypnotic. No, I'm just playing with you.
Perfect. I'm going to ask the people in the technical room if they could raise the volume inside this room a little bit.
All right. Should I scream or something?
I think everything on your end is now perfect.
Okay.
We see each other again in 15 minutes.
All right. Very good.
Perfect.
All right.
Yeah, this is perfect.
All right. I'll just leave everything the way it is and then come back to you.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if I touch something, something terrible will happen.
Yeah, I'd say leave it like this.
Okay. Very good. See you soon.
So, hi, Larry. For your awareness,
Yes.
the participants are currently on a break. The
Right.
last ran a little over time, but I hope that we start 30 sharp.
Yeah.
Um,
I've got nothing else to do.
I currently cannot hear you. I'll talk to the
Ooh.
people in the technical room to see why that is.
Okay. Let's see. I have a fancier microphone. Let me put this on. I think. Can I do that? Yes, I can. Let's see if this does anything. Ah. No.
All right, Larry, I think we can hear you now.
Oh,
Yeah, we can hear you. Was a problem on our end.
okay.
All right, we hear you very well now. That's perfect.
Hooray. Right, now I got something wrong with my TV. See. Oh, good. I got some time to fix it.
All right.
Just in case we need that.
Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Test, test, test.
Oh no, I can't. I don't test well.
This is years and years of testing.
Oh God. Yeah, I know. After a while, it grows old.
Right.
Can you see it?
Heard that COVID came, and now when I am an IT person.
Oh God, and now you're constantly testing.
Yeah. All right. I'm spreading two microphones around the room so that the participants who are in the room, if they
Okay.
have questions, well, so that you can hear them. When a participant asks a question, what we're going to try to do is to put the camera on them.
Oh,
but that
beautiful.
some improvising from our side. So we'll see how that goes.
Okay, great. I can see their bored faces.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you see the screen? Because I have
Yeah.
this sharing, but I see myself with some horror.
Oh, yeah. For your awareness, I'm now pointing at the screen where your face is.
Uh-huh.
There, 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 and there.
Oh
we
my
have
God.
4 screens which show your PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. Okay, beautiful. Oh, I knew I should have gone and gotten facial lipo before this.
I heard that the whole lipo industry has had to change after COVID because people need to look good on Zoom.
Oh
rather
my
than-
God, absolutely. It's all in the lips and eyebrows.
I would mind
I'm afraid it's a little late for me. All right, so we're all set.
Exactly.
Perfect. Yeah.
5 more minutes and then people should
Oh,
be
okay. That'll work.
just pretty sharp. Larry, just to be sure, your PowerPoint is currently no longer at full screen mode.
Oh no. All right, hold on a second.
Perfect.
This machine has a mind of its own. I knew I shouldn't have put all those AI programs on it.
It's the Russians.
That it's always the Russians. Uh, although in the US, it's either the Russians or the Chinese. Yeah. I'll be back. Ugh.
All right. Good afternoon. Welcome back to everybody in the room, and welcome to those joining on Zoom here. We're in a room in The Hague, and the lecture that we're welcoming Professor Larry Kata-Bakker to now is part of a Spring Academy on the legal tech of sustainability, due diligence, and value chain regulation, based on the idea that the future of a lot of these regulations is presumably, if one wants it or not, and to an extent that is perhaps still to be determined, but will in any event be digital, will be based on digital infrastructures and digital technologies. So here in The Hague, we have a full week-long program with speakers from business, from legal tech, from academia, from policy, and had a full day already. But this said, we're now more than excited, the whole group here, to welcome our keynote speaker to really start the week of this academy, Larry Kata-Bakker, who is a professor of law and international affairs at Penn State University. Good morning, Larry, to a not so early morning in the US East Coast. And Larry is really a pioneer in the two types of debates that we're trying to fuse here, which is the debate around ESG, business and human rights, and sustainable corporate governance on the one hand, and artificial intelligence, law and technology on the other. And so when asking ourselves here together with Antoine, my co-host and co-organizer, sitting next to me, when wondering who would be a perfect figure to kick us off, Larry immediately came to mind. We're more than happy that he accepted, because truly there aren't many people that have made as pioneering and inspiring contributions to both fields. And on top of this, seem suited for this task to look both to the past and to the future of digitally mediated sustainability due diligence, not least because Larry was part of the wider drafting project of the UN Guiding Principles with John Ruggie, and those who are familiar with his work, or after having seen his presentation, I'm sure you will agree that he also brings the same inspirational gist and vision to the table. So with this, Larry, we're excited. Thank you for joining, and the floor is yours.
Oh my God, you're welcome. But now you've made me you have reimagined me in a kind of digital form that I suspect I will never be able to live up to. I like the pioneer image though. But anyway, thank you all for having me. Thank you for the the trust you put in me to guide you between now and the cocktail hour that awaits you in about an hour, maybe less, if I can do this efficiently. And I'm really delighted to be here. We are merging tech and diligence, and my talk is really going to be about merging interpenetrations, and because we become a digital culture in a sense, and because we abhor text, I tried to find an image that actually substituted for the hour that now I'm going to burden you with a lot of chatter. And that's this first image. For those of you who've never seen the movie, the 2005 movie Serenity, the movie itself it's a space opera, but it has some very interesting themes, sub-themes that I'm going to draw on. And this is one of them. The woman who is merging with the image, which is triggering her to kill a bunch of people in about 2 seconds after this image, it kind of represents a little bit what we're going to be talking about today. And in a sense, what we're also going to be talking about is, and so everything I'm going to do involves imagery and text, and we're going to do them together. We're talking about diligence systems and tech. We're talking about imagery and consciousness. There's going to be a lot of dualities here. So some of what I'm going to be saying is going to be embedded in the images, which sometimes speak, I think, more precisely than the text. But mostly what I'm going to do today is look at the plumbing and the HVAC system of diligence and of big data tech. No one likes the HVAC. No one likes plumbing. It's ugly. You put walls up, you put particle board up, and it's gone, and you don't see it. But without it, you don't understand how that sort of shapes everything else that you're talking about. And so my role, in a sense, is to talk about the plumbing, the HVAC system, and the way in which they're going to shape the structures, the debates, the way in which we see things over the course of the next 5 or 10 or 15 years. And I've got my little flow of remarks. We're going to be doing a lot of flowing and signaling. I'm going to start with the plumbing, which are the ordering concepts. I'm going to offer you 3 of them. And then I'm going to look at the operating systems, the systems of sustainability due diligence, and then the emerging systems of big data, and mostly AI, which is the flavor of the month. But really, it encompasses all of this. And we're going to look at them as 2 operating systems, 2 platforms that then are interpenetrating, and that's sort of where the fun comes in. We're going to look at the nature of the interpenetration. The Astor Institute has done a lot of marvelous work looking at this, and in that context, I'm going to pull you back again at the end and suggest how all of this, these platforms, these operating systems, are actually operating within a larger field of enormously transformative trajectories that have been in place certainly since the 1990s. Bring them to the fore, and then end by asking the question that I always like to ask, and I have no idea whether it's coming, and we'll know when it's too late. Is a revolution coming? And if it is, what's its character? From what I'm going to offer you is something that I think will be both exhilarating, but mostly disappointing in that regard. So that's sort of what we're going to do. And here we go back. There's 2 pictures. They're not identical. One of them is what you see. The other one, the one on top, is embedded in code, and it's the code that triggers you visually, but then stimulates action. And in a sense, when you're looking at diligence, and when you're looking at diligence in a tech environment, you're looking at both of these. You're looking at the surface, and what you're looking at, this is an ad in the movie for candy bar, and then you're looking underneath, because that ad for a candy bar is going to trigger, in this case, violence. Additional and what comes after violence. And in a sense, it also it suggests the fundamental dissonance within our ordering concepts that penetrates both the platform of diligence and the platform of big data tech. And that is this continuing, and it's unresolved, it probably never will be resolved, tension between 2 distinct ways of looking at the world. One of them is static, deductive, top-down, that is from principle or norm to action. It is grounded in freezing the past to project it onto the future. It's the way we have been taught since we were in our diapers. I don't know if people wear diapers anymore. They certainly do at the end of life. But anyway, it's what you've been socialized to think of as the only possible correct and superior way of not only looking at the world and understanding it, but ordering it as well. It's the world of legality. It's the world of the balance sheet. It's the world of frozen assessments. It's static, deductive, top-down. When you bring big tech in, however, when you bring in dialectic systems of diligence, what you're looking at is a very different way of looking at the world, which is dynamic, inductive, iterative, bottom up, that is from action to principle, these iterations from which you then you induce the sort of principles that then guide responses to future iterations in a never-ending flow. And indeed, the question that we face when we confront both diligence in tech and the interpenetration of diligence in tech is whether, in fact, we're going to be privileging the moment, the balance sheet, in order to see the world around us, or whether we're going to privilege the flow, that is the income, for those of you who are in business, the income statement and statement of cash flows as the space from out of which you both order and then manage the world. That's sort of ordering concept number one. And ordering concept number two, of course, within that debate, you've got the construction of platforms. And we're going to be looking at two and their interpenetration. On one side, of course, you've got the modalities, expectations, practices, constitutions, and legalities of the development and management of productive forces, because that, in a sense, is what we're looking at when we're looking at diligence. We're looking at the way in which social collectives, in the construction of their social relations, develop mechanisms, values-based mechanisms, to both develop and exploit collective productive forces. And in this case, of course, we're looking at economic activity, whatever that means. Some economists, theoretical economists, suggest that's a ridiculous phrase. Everything that is value producing is quote unquote economic, and then the philosophers will debate, and we love categorizing, certainly since Linnaeus in the West, and that will continue to amuse us and PhD students for the next 100 years or so. But you've got that on one side. And then on the other side, you've got its simulacra. You've got the French actually have been leading this about 2 generations ago. Astonishing work in the French philosophical side on the notion of the construction of the transformation of those things by which we understand ourselves, data, bits, and its reconstruction in a virtual and digitalized world as simulations of itself, which then can be the basis for doing 3 things. One of them is, and we're going to go through this again over and over, one of them is to describe, that is to create the hologram, a description of the thing that it is on which we mean to work or understand. The second thing is we will use that simulacra to predict. It's to travel forward in time, fixing or managing inputs to see what happens in terms of outputs in the future, right? And so you've got descriptive and predictive analytics. And then the third thing, of course, is that because of the nature and volume of these things, the simulation becomes more and more accurate the more and more data it has, and the more and more data it has, the less different it is from the thing it's supposed to be describing, essentializing, or summarizing, right? You then have to delegate the task of description and prediction to a generative intelligence, that is, to a program of programs. And when you interpenetrate both of these is when the fun begins, right? And then the third one, of course, right? So this is sort of background, but it also, once you have these 3, you kind of understand where we're going in the next 20 minutes or so. And the third one is that none of this happens in a vacuum. Academics certainly, and scientists like, and philosophers certainly, like to pretend that you can start from a state of nature, a null state, and then build, and that's impossible. And in this case, we've got a very densely populated ecology of trajectories of changes in the way in which social collectives tend to view themselves, that have a significant effect both on the way in which these platforms, the diligence platform and the big data platforms are understood, and the way in which they're manipulated and exploited. And these involve 3 points that I'll expand if I have time a little more later. One of them is the governmentalization of the public and private sphere, the reconceptualization and the role and purpose of economic activity as an instrument, not in and of itself, but as an instrument of public objectives and policy objectives, whether or not they are legalized. And then the third is, of course, the encountering, exploiting, and taming of collective virtual spaces. And the Europeans, of course, are, the Chinese as well, but in a very different way, are light years ahead of the Americans on the effort, not necessarily successful, but on the effort to do this themselves. So that's what we're going to look at. And all of this is a moment where you're going to take a deep breath. All of this will lead you to where I want to take you at the end of this, right? And so there's 3 fundamental takeaways. I put them here. And the image, of course, should raise an eyebrow. If I have takeaways, it should be a moment of pause, but instead what I'm offering you is a series of endless reflections, endless dialectives. Each of them appears to mimic. There's a mimesis here, each of which appears to mimic the others, but each of them are slightly different, taking you through, in this case, a virtual pathway towards you don't know where, but as a aggregation of these mimicking iterative reflections or replaying of particular actions. So here's the three of them. You can read them. I prefer not to. When you get down to it, one of the values and challenges that we have when you amalgamate diligence and big tech platforms are that their operating systems are incompatible. One tends or has certainly started from the platform of legality, the kind of static balance sheet approach. The other is dynamic, virtual, and digital. Given that the way in which interpenetration becomes effective is by building mediating bridges, which is what you're really talking about. You're not talking about tech, you're not talking about diligence, but what you're talking about are the mediating systems, the mediating things that make it possible. For those of you who are 5,000 years old, you'll remember the mediating programs that were necessary in order for someone with a word word processing system to read word perfect documents. They were completely incompatible. There was no way around but by building these kind of bridges, right? And then the third one is, of course, this dissonance is actually not a negative, but a very positive force, because what it essentially does is jumpstart this dialectic between the two of them that will not only change each of them, but that will move them forward. Hopefully, this is the best case scenario that will move them forward towards something that will get closer to whatever variegated objectives those who mean to exploit it have in mind for them. So we're going to start with the enterprise of the platform, the diligence. We're then going to look at the platform of big data. We're going to mash them all up together. We're going to look at their what is driving them. And then we're going to see where the challenges and the opportunities lie. And by that time, you'll be ready for a drink or two and dinner, and I will be done. All right. So the enterprise of diligence. I've been talking about mimicry, right? Of mimesis, and here we go. So we're going to look at due diligence, and who better for due diligence than the modern incarnations of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, which is real, which is not. What are they looking at? We see them, we don't see what they're looking at, and that's diligence. Effectively, we think we can see, but we don't know, and we're looking in a variety of different directions. Now, all of this, again, we don't start on a blank slate, so there's a historical accounting, and who better than Ben Affleck, an accountant with a gun, to remind us about where this all comes from. Right, we start by blending two streams, the disclosure in securities markets from the 1930s. This is grounding in public law and not judgment, but disclosure. So you've got markets and information, and those markets and informations are meant to stabilize markets in transactions and securities. And at the same time, no one talks about this very much, but they are related. You've got risk minimization strategies in the United States through the courts, in Europe through the development of code, and then worked on by the courts of risk minimization in caveat emptor environments. That is the rise of expectations, which are then hardened in private law, with respect to the obligation of parties to private economic transactions to undertake the sort of diligence that will make it less likely for a court to then have to go and say, well, if you'd only looked here, you wouldn't have had this problem, so why are you taking up my time? So those two things kind of come together, and they cross what I call the blood-brain barrier, and have some effect on the development of the UN guiding principles and their human rights due diligence. Now note, in this context, it is the private markets element that predominated. The state pillar was the state pillar, and they can do what they want in the way that they've been doing it under whatever principles of international law suits them. This was the new space, which irritated the civil society organizations tremendously, scared the private sector businesses, but it seemed to work out. So you've got human rights due diligence, and the idea was, well, look, we've already been doing this. This makes perfect sense, and it aligns with market expectations. We're going to do that, and with tremendous inspiration, certainly since the 2007 report that John produced from environmental due diligence. So a lot of stuff comes together. Environmental due diligence, these old trajectories, prevent, mitigate, and remedy principles, and they're recombined eventually, certainly after 2015, as what now emerges, certainly in Europe and then everywhere else in markets, of sustainability due diligence. Right. And so you see all of that. And what winds up happening because of that is that we have now two substantially different forms of diligence systems in the context of human rights and sustainability. One is essentially focused on private law and private engagements in the economic field. The other is focused on legalities, that is the creation of legal structures around which diligence can be managed by and through the state and its techno-bureaucracies. So one is market-centered, one is not, and that is essentially the difference between the UN guiding principles. There's more than that, clearly, between the guiding principles and the new CS3D, Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, building on the lessons learned from the French and German experiences. So what are we talking about with the UNGP? The first thing we say is, thank God it's not the 90s and we don't have to wear that anymore. That's a younger John Ruggie and a younger Kofi Annan. Right at the beginning, you can ask yourself, which is more important, the UN, the special representative, or the image that they chose to stand for this picture, which itself is probably more illustrative of what's going on than anything else. You can read through this. Most people know this. I'm not going to spend very much time. What you're looking at in the context of diligence, not the UNGP, but in the context of diligence, is 5 things, and then mediating principles, right? A policy commitment at the top. It was tone at the top, which was very important in the project. And then you've got 4 you've got purposes. The purpose is to identify, prevent, mitigate, and account for the way in which an enterprise addresses the critical thing. This is the coding object: human rights adverse impacts, or human rights impacts. The only ones you're going to act on are adverse impacts. And you're going to do that by assessing, integrating, enacting, tracking, and communicating. And these are going to be mediated in terms of what it is you're going to do by 4 principles. The prevent, you start with prevention, then mitigation, then remedy. This is mediated by severity. Which one do you do first, the most severe? How much do you have to do will depend on whether it's direct or indirect causation. And then the last is, we understand that we can't get you in law at large multinational enterprises, but you've got some authority, so you're going to use leverage. That's the famous or maybe infamous leverage provisions in Principle 19. And that's how it works. Compare the public law-based diligence systems. And again, recall that the UNGP are grounded on corporations, facilitated perhaps by the states, but grounded in corporations acting in the markets. SC3D, the sustainability, the corporate sustainability, CS3D, sorry, the corporate sustainability due diligence directive borrows from, and this makes perfect sense. I think most of the members of the member states of the EU are OECD members. The OECD and the UNGP have kind of aligned in their working. They borrowed the conceptual frameworks. The discussions between Paris and Brussels has been sustained and deep and quite productive. And they came up with 6 steps. Unlike the UNGP, 6 steps mediated by member state techno-bureaucracies overseen by the bureaucratic structures in Brussels. And then, of course, in Strasbourg, if people whine about whatever it is that is being done, right? And you see the 6 critical steps. They're suspiciously similar to the UNGP, but again, the focus and the place in which they operate is very different. And there is an extraordinary amount of definition. From a coding perspective, the 100+ pages of the directive is a much easier assignment for a Scrum Master, translating this into the kinds of programming necessary to use big data systems to manage this than the UNGP, which calls for a lot more work. Right, and so those are the platforms. That's their genesis, and you can begin to see in the way in which they're created. Again, even in the way in which I've laid these out, the ease with which you have created categories and categorical streams that lend themselves to coded operationalization. The difficulties come in the actual details of the coding. It's very easy to utter a grand statement. It's much harder to put it into a code from out of which you can extract data and then analyze data as a function of either augmentation or diminution, the coefficient, or against each other. The CS triple D is much better at that than the UNGP, but they're coming from the same place, right? So given the platforms and given their amenability, it makes sense then to talk about compliance tech, but also to talk about compliant technologies. And again, here we're looking at the same kind of thing. We're looking at economic activities, which now must be molded to public policy. And now we're looking at tech that must be molded to serve a particular instrumental purpose. And in that process, the question that is highly relevant is, what are you changing in terms of conceptions, perceptions, operations, objectives in the process of mediating from one compliance tech to compliant technologies? And that's sort of what we're going to look at now. Again, we go back to Serenity and Mr. Universe. There's mutual bridging, and thank you, Asser Institute. That was a great report, by the way, that you did last year. What we have here is the marriage. This is Mr. Universe, who's a router for signals and flow, who's marrying his companion bot. And then all kinds of things happen, but that's in a sense what we're looking at here. Can you wed? Can you interpenetrate these two platforms? And there are a number of positives that are well known, and that you're going to be talking about, my guess is, in some detail in the days to come. You've got mapping. Mapping is always it's amazing that corporations have been able to survive all this time without doing the kind of mapping that now is required. But at the same time, this kind of mapping in large multinational enterprises would have been really beyond the capacity of people without the aid of big data technology. So there it is, upstream and downstream, and that's critically important for the European directive. It's upstream and downstream product life cycles. That wasn't very clear in the UNGP. So you've got this extraordinary amount of effectively 3D mapping that for which the tech will be very useful. The detect and assess, there's nothing better for gorging on data and then digesting it than big data programs, especially with respect to sustainability, risks, and impact. I add modeling and predicting. None of this is worthwhile. The iterative value of this is not merely one-off, but each of them, and the European effort makes this very clear, with each iteration of impact detection, the system itself is supposed to adjust to the consequences of each of these iterative discoveries. And so that would require not just changes that are mindless, but some kind of direction. So you're going to need modeling, both descriptive modeling and predictive modeling, to especially if you're going to be worrying about prevention as opposed to mitigation and remediation. And of course, monitoring it in a techno-bureaucratic concept that context in which we operate, feeding the state's techno-bureaucracies is almost as important as feeding the techno data, the big data techno machine, in order to come up with risks and impacts. So you need to worry about compliance risk across platforms and across requirements. The Chinese, the Europeans, the Americans are all going to be different. And of course, you're always worried about, well, no one's actually worried about it until things go wrong, but you should be worried about quality control, testing, constant testing of your system and its relation to whatever standards you have. But things can blow up. This is, of course, that nice lady in the first slide, after she gets triggered by the tech instructions, and then she starts blowing things up. And there are a number of ways in which this relationship can blow up. And you're going to be spending a bit of time looking at this. We're looking at effectiveness issues. These are the risks. Coding, like statutes, political bodies can write really bad law, administrative organs can write really bad regulations, coders can write really bad code, and you got to figure out how to deal with that. Data garbage, there is so much data garbage. Not only that, but there's garbage warehousing, there's garbage all over the place, and the old saying in the data world, garbage in, garbage out, becomes a problem. The conceptual frameworks that you're going to use, especially if you've got 3 or 4 different that you have to align somehow, the objectives of all of this, and of course the alignment of the OS, the operating systems that you're dealing with here. The other risk, and it's a huge risk, is amplifying bias. Understand that the European directive, as well as the UNGP, is not a biasless system, but they are systems. They are platforms for the privileging of certain biases that are socially valuable. In our case now, we're looking at the bias for a particular way of looking at equality. We're looking at biases with respect to traditionally marginalized people. And we're also looking at identifying and suppressing taboo biases as well. So we've got, if we get this wrong, we can amplify or over-amplify both positive bias and negative bias. Knowing the difference between the two becomes very hard at the margins. And of course, tech itself is an adverse impact. That is certainly true. Privacy, manipulation, the manipulative possibilities of tech, although it's interesting to me that we worry about tech manipulation when we've been manipulating each other for 30,000 years, but there you go. And of course, the effect on the environment. These things take up lots of power, as do electronic vehicles. And at some point, somewhere, you're going to have to pay the environmental costs. All right. And so that brings us, if that's the case, then just as we have begun to legalize, manage, and privilege diligence as a means of affecting and directing economic activity, so we are applying the same kind of impulse in the management, direction, and exploitation of big data. And the example I give in the talk, and you're all welcome to, the text of the talk is online, and you're welcome to read it at greater length. I don't want to take up too much time on this. The example I give is, of course, the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. The UN has been working on this. The Americans, in their own way, have been working on this. And of course, the Chinese are working on this from a Marxist-Leninist perspective. But the European one, we're in The Hague, or you guys are in The Hague. And so I figured the European one would be of most interest to you. And again, we've got these binaries. So we've got a set of objectives. And again, these are values privileging objectives, which then seep into and constrain the diligence objectives and modalities to which they are directed. You've got to ensure that they're placed on the market and they use that they're safe and respect existing laws. I have no idea what that means. I don't think anyone does, but we'll figure it out. Legal certainty, and again, this kind of snapshot balance sheet approach. The UN and the Americans are no better. Enhancing governance and effective enforcement of existing law. I don't know where, well, anyway, and facilitating the development of a single market. That makes sense, of course. You're not going to want to do this to fracture the markets. But at the same time, you've got a bunch of stuff that's suppressed. And in looking at what's suppressed, of course, you're looking at two things. One is that a lot of this stuff is not suppressed by competing systems, the Chinese and the Americans, for example. And the other thing is that some of these are actually quite useful in the context of developing AI-based diligence protocols, but they're biometric categorizations that use quote unquote sensitive characteristics. Figure coding for that is going to be really interesting. Untargeted scraping of facial images. It's sort of old news, but people still worry about it. You get points. Emotion recognition. Emotion recognition is huge everywhere. But it's going to be suppressed at least in some form. Social scoring, that's Chinese social credit and and also European sort of credit worthiness. I don't know how they're going to mediate that. This is social as opposed to economic scoring. Manipulation of human behaviors to circumvent their free will. I have no idea what that means. Nietzsche would suggest that there is no such thing as free will. This is a European conversation that's 150 years old, and it continues now in the virtual spaces. And then to exploit vulnerabilities of people. Every interaction does that. So how they're going to legalize that is beyond me. But anyway, this tends to be, again, we've got systems of constraint that are run on the basis of quite different conceptual bases that then in the interpenetration of these two systems will tend to affect the way in which you work. On the other hand, it may not matter. Are we the pretty pirate, or are we Davy Jones as he transformed himself, having spent several hundred years in the ocean? We've got exceptions, limitations, interpretation. We've got competition and convergence from other regulatory regimes that I mentioned. And of course, we have the rise of unofficial market. It is not clear to me how either AI or diligence systems is going to have much of an effect on very motivated civil society people working out of basements or in coffee shops, or how they are going to deal with that nice 13-year-old girl who is operating her own AI coding enterprise from the basement of her parents' home. And they will be there, much less the more nefarious characters that are operating at the margins of proper society. And of course, the bridging of rule text and coded applications are going to be quite interesting as well. So you've got a lot of things to worry about here, but you've got parallels as well between the kind of challenges and modalities that are being developed around the concepts of diligence and those that kind of constrain or change the realities of AI. All right, and so when we look at this, from the and so we've got this, and we said, well, is there anything that's holding this together? And the answer is yes, as I've suggested. I'm almost done. We're working towards the end, and I know I don't want to take up. I want to leave enough time for questions. So, what are the kind of general trajectories that will inform and that have been expressed by or in or through both the construction of diligence platforms I've given you two and the constructions of AI platforms. And I've listed 5. There are probably more, but this should get the job done. The most important, I think, is the first one. It's the general trend within liberal democratic political orders to deepen the scope of the governmentalization of the private and the transnational sphere. And in our case here, through this thing, which is now being reified in really interesting ways, the multinational enterprise, which doesn't exist as a matter of law, except sometimes in Germany, but which is now indirectly being formed, developed, and objectified through these sideways operations through AI, and certainly through diligence pathways, adverse impact diligence pathways. We've got and this, of course, will have collateral effects, the transformation of multinational enterprises from economic organs, private economic organs, to organs through which state power can be applied directly. That has a significant effect. We've had debates in the corporate area on the nature and privileging of one the capitalist, that is the shareholder, as opposed to the stakeholder, and two, the privileging and the privileged role of profit in the context of economic activities. Those conversations are being held sub rosa. No one really wants to go there because everyone will get mad and you'll get nowhere. So instead, we work through proxies. And proxies are built in within these AI diligence systems. How you create them will tend to assume the answer to those questions, but it's very clear that from the perspective of governmentalization, what winds up happening is what we begin to see is the convergence of bureaucratic sensibilities and the rise of techno-bureaucracies, both in the private sector, in large corporations, and in the public sector, with these technologically savvy administrative organs that are tied increasingly to their coders, and that will help change in a way the way in which we approach business, at least within this context, from what it had been before. And of course, this new double role will, at its limits, will create something that we thought we didn't have, and that is to create state-directed economic activities, which begin to approach, in effect and at their limit, the sort of state-run Leninist conception of the aggregations of state assets for the purpose of production that we see in developing now. The theory is now becoming quite elaborate and very sophisticated within Marxist-Leninist regimes. So there's a convergence there. And then there's of course, there's acceleration of the rise in markets for regulation. There'll be third-party providers that you'll be talking with and through, and then operating system obsolescence. The most exciting thing for lawyers, anyway, the most exciting thing about statutes, texts, and regulations are that they're obsolete as soon as they're enacted. This is, of course, the problem of the snapshot. When you're dealing with the flow, this operating system obsolescence becomes a real difficulty in terms of actually creating efficient systems. Although the more we move to the flow, the more there is this almost hysterical effort to embrace this kind of death embrace of these old legalities grounded in this 19th century notions of status that you can, through the dead hand of the law, control in a kind of a historical way the future. I think that will end badly, but there it is. And so, but given all of that, we need to figure out where we are. And so now I'm going to begin to sum up, and we've got challenges. So we've got all of these pieces that we've got to put together, because at the end of the day, we are going to have to develop both efficient diligence and big data platform, and efficient ways of interpenetration for the purpose of mediating between them and state organs. And so the big challenge is, of course, that corporate operations and their techno-bureaucracies tend to be still essentially analog in the way in which they operate and in the way in which they see the world. Big data, descriptive, predictive, and generative processes are digital and virtual. In the text, if I had more time, I'd talk to you about the differences between them and how they tend to affect the Lebenswelt, the imaginaries of these things. I also don't have time for that, but that's sort of the gap between them that then has to be bridged somehow. And so we've got a number of challenges, and with more time, I'd spend more time talking about them. I've categorized them as 4 forms of challenge. The first one is, of course, the challenge of translation. If the analog is structured through norms, rules, and presumptions that even if they're elastic when they're expressed as text, they become prisons. The digital is programmed. So we've got analog norms. Digital is programmed that can be constituted in a much more fluid way. The analog, and it follows, of course, that the analog transmits in words and sounds, and the digital transmits as manifestations of codes. And to be able to bridge that, translate that, becomes critically important. The second include a cluster of challenges around being or becoming, that is the being or becoming of the operating system itself, right? The analog is wired. It's your grandmother's radio that you have to plug into an electrical grid. The digital operates through data-fed simulacra, right? It exists in a virtual space, data-driven, and its connection to the physical is very different than that of the analog, and mediating between the two becomes somewhat challenging. The analog is housed in carbon-based life forms. I know this at this point you go, my God, of course, this is the obvious, but it makes a tremendous difference. It is housed ultimately or centered on carbon-based life forms. The digital is silicon-based or virtual intelligence or reality that is not constrained by and therefore not particularly interested in the drama, desires, lusts, fears, and neuroses of carbon-based life forms. It will assume its own, right? The third challenges, of course, are the challenges around the processing of knowledge. And here we're looking at, we've already mentioned this, the difference in dialectics between deductive processes, and that's the diligence platform, and iterative inductive processing, which is at the heart of big data tech. And the last, of course, that I will mention is the management and control. One of the things that's emerging that's kind of interesting is the notion that, in fact, it is the human, the analog, that in building big data systems then owns or controls them. They're our slave, they're our instrument, they're not human, and therefore they can be treated shabbily or they can be turned on or off. The problem is, of course, that is not necessarily true. These systems, especially in their predictive and generative forms, exist whether or not we choose to turn them on or off, whether or not we choose to exploit them in a particular way or not. Those things exist, and at some point, somehow, those things will be a temptation too much. It will happen. A kind of mundane example, I recall when a university that will not be named rolled out some kind of program, and then it was determined that this program could do something that was actually very privacy challenging. When they were called on that, the university official said, "Oh, well, that may be true, but don't worry, we're not going to use it. We are only going to use this other thing." And of course, history has a way of people change and all kinds of other things change. So one has to worry about that. So where does that leave us? Well, it's clear that and I'll end with this, revolution is coming, but what is its form? There was a series of programs when the Chinese were trying to develop the current form of Leninist theory in the current historical period of development. And they had this TV series where Marx meets Confucius in a European style town hall mediated by Mao. And for those of you who, it'll have the subtitles, those of you who can speak Chinese probably know about this and will enjoy this, but that's essentially where we are. When a society, and this is the point, the society is revealing itself, and certainly ours is, when it consciously confronts something that is threatening. The printing press was threatening, the plow was threatening, there are all kinds of things that are threatening, and that revelation becomes acute when it is also a temptation that's irresistible. And what I'm offering you to close this off is that revolutions have to be understood, and certainly the digital one and the diligence one, as both reactionary, and we saw that, for example, in the AI legislation and in the formalities of due diligence, keep things as they are, exploit but control. The reactionary or traditional reflex is very strong, but at the same time, there's a revolutionary reflex as well. These things can get out of control. Just ask Robespierre in 1791, and it can, as Robespierre learned to his chagrin, it can as easily cut the head off of those who seek to exploit its revolutionary potentials as not. And that's sort of where we are. Miranda, by the way, is the triggering code for this thing to occur. So thank you very, very much. I hope some of this at least was understandable and may help inform your engagement with the this just extraordinarily fascinating and quickly moving dynamic area of law and governance. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Larry, for weaving it all together from past, present to future and revolution even, and for also showing us in the visuals and in the style that the static deductive top-down order has definitely passed. So I think we could take 15 minutes to let the notes sink in and let your thoughts clear up again, but we will use them instead for Q&A. So 10 to 15 minutes, and I open the floor both here in the room and on Zoom. Please write us, raise your hand, and then we'll give you the floor. But we have some first questions in the room. Kunal.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Bai Laoshi, for your fascinating presentation, and also the previous slides. This is very intriguing, especially the Chairman Mao meets the two. It's very interesting you use revolution as a term to describe what's happening. We said the encounter or the marriage between the digital data, the big data, and also the sustainability areas. So my question is, what if we said it's a revolution or a shift in paradigm? So it will be a future of this revolution. So one possible future is divergence, right? More and more, as you said, China, US, EU, in a very much geopolitical-led society, the due diligence, which is a transnational legal atmosphere or mechanism here, that it requires the cooperation among corporates and also other stakeholders, including the governments from different global players to engage. So as we see now, we discussed a lot this morning that the EU CSTDD or other EU law, which is a kind of EU law which give rise to extraterritorial effects outside the EU to require the third countries companies to follow. So that says if you, a Chinese company in Xinjiang, if you want to maintain your orders from the EU, from Volkswagen, that I have to prove myself that, okay, I'm clean here, I don't have forced labor, and maybe the big data is going to help us to prove that. So, we also see that there is a divergence, a deeper and deeper divergence between China and the West, and also the US, EU. There is not everything the same. So there's one possibility that's the divergence or the regionalized due diligence system or regionalized data regulations, as the book in Digital Empire by Anu Bradford, who mentions, you see, three models: the state-led models of China, the markets model of US, and the rules model of the EU. So there was a divergence in the AI laws, in the digital laws, and also in the sustainability values. That's one thing. So this is a divergence future after the revolution. The other revolution is there is a convergence. There were some compromises, trade-offs, like the CSTDD after the council's approval. So we see the civil liability gone, almost gone, and the scale down, watered down. So there's another convergence. So just in very general, we're interested in your thoughts on this, the future after the revolutions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kunal. We will collect questions here, and I believe there was at least one more. Okay, there's more. Yeah, then let's go. Joao, Angela.
Yeah, my name is João Freitas. I'm doing the PhD on the subject of sustainability due diligence broadly. And I was wondering a bit if you can develop a bit and comment on your conception between this division of, this private law model and this public law model that is more based on legality, because at least from my perception, both the UNGPs and the OECD guidelines actually have much more of a public law pedigree than a private law pedigree, in the sense that they reflect normative expectations that are approved and endorsed by public authorities, not necessarily so frontally by these private authorities. So I'm interested just to hear a bit more on why do you think this UNGP's framework reflects more of a private law approach to this problem? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Professor. Thank you for your lecture. I'm Angela Scambri. I'm Colombian. I have many questions, but I wanted just to ask you two, I think. You began your presentation talking about concepts that were already built in base of constitutions, legalities, and also the development of a productive force, like categories that exist, as we previously said and discussed this morning, in a Western vision or in a capitalistic economic model. So can due diligence and technology be more inclusive with other models, other visions, to be more effectively applied in the global South countries? That's the first question. The second question is also that I am seeing that the use of new technologies is imminent. You say it's a revolution, but I don't know, there is another problem, I think, of legitimacy. Who is using these technologies? Who is producing this data? Who has the control of this data? The developed countries. And for example, before we were knowing, it's my first time I didn't know a new tool to help enterprises to measure the risk of companies. And for example, it was just in English. So I thought, okay, what is the legitimacy of the information first? And second, how can we speak, for example, of risk in Colombia, Ecuador, other countries, if we are not seeing the principal sources, the direct sources, because there's a barrier of language and also there is a barrier of knowledge. So I think it's very complicated. And I think this could create also another asymmetric of power, another imbalance of power, because now it's not only the political power, but it's also the technological power and the information power. So it's very complicated. How can we face this challenge? Also, because I think, I don't know, it's a little bit worried, but it's imminent. So as a Colombian, I'm very interested in this, and I would like to hear your opinion. How can improve this legitimacy, these issues, and to balance a little bit and share these tools also in an equal way with the countries in which we are measuring the risk, in which we are investing, and in which we are applying laws that are not made there. It's, I don't know. This was the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry, we'll pass it back to you. And then if there's final questions, we'll do a brief second round. Blessing, I have you noted. If there's anybody on Zoom, also raise your hand.
Okay, and people are more than welcome to contact me offline as well if they want to keep the conversation going. I'm really sorry I'm not there to spend more time chatting, but please feel free to reach out. And again, both the text and the slides are online, and we can pass along the links to get them. All right, 3 really, really good questions. I'm not gonna do justice to them, but let me talk a little bit about each of them. Yeah, the thing about revolution is that it's you really only see it, and you can only talk about it after you're done, assuming you survive. And yeah, there are at least two, probably three different ways that revolutions go in the context of this of kind of power control, which is really what I think what the question is talking about. The divergence one is very real. And in fact, it was in January at the Davos conference that that the three forms, markets, regulation, and state, really came out in the speeches by Ursula von der Leyen, by the president of Argentina, Milei, and by the Chinese foreign minister. And for those of you who haven't read it, those three speeches are really worth the time to look at to give you the underlying sense of where at least the elites who are now controlling the techno-bureaucracies of these three camps are going. And yeah, that's going to be a problem. And the problem, of course, in divergence, we've already seen in China, where over the course of the last 6 or 8 months, including 3 weeks ago, the Chinese authorities have begun applying their anti-espionage and state secrets laws to European and American-based firms, the purpose of which is to, wait for it, to harvest data from portions of the supply chains that either originate in or run through areas controlled by the Chinese government. And that's going to be a problem. The other problem, of course, it's, we always talk about the Chinese and that's too easy a target. Much more interesting, for example, in the context of data, is the differences between the approach to what is permitted data to be gathered in Europe, which is very restrictive, for example, with respect to the right not to be known and blah, 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 as against the Americans that have I don't know what we have, but whatever it is, it's broader than this. And so you're going to have these misalignments that will produce divergence, even if at the very top, the tone at the top is one of convergence. And yeah, if you've got convergence, I think you're absolutely right. One way that there will be convergence, and I wrote a little thing about this a couple of weeks ago, is that you're going to have to horse trade. And what you wind up getting is something less than what you thought. But that's the way it's been for a long time. On the other hand, this may be an area where it's difficult because you've got multiple moving parts. So you've got convergence, you've got divergence, and we're looking at it from the state sector. I would add a third, which is fragmentation. And the model for the fragmentation is Japan in 1890, where you've got two Japans. You've got an elite group, and this will happen in Europe, in the United States, and China. You've got this elite group that is involved in the flow of global conversations and global controversies and deals within or among these three platforms and other things. And then you've got underneath that the country, that part of each of those places that are untouched, except episodically, and within which all kinds of other things can grow, both in diligence and tech. And so I would add to divergence and convergence, fragmentation, not global fragmentation, but fragmentation within each of these, a kind of class and functional fragmentation. The public law, private law, yeah, that's been we've been fighting about this. At least I've been fighting about this since 2006, and now I'm oh my God, the weight of ages is now falling on me. There's a simple explanation. Absolutely. In most cases, and with respect to many things, the articulation of norms, especially in compliance-based regimes, whether they're legal or policy, has tended, certainly since the 1970s, to originate more and more and more often from the organs of state and public power. The question then for public and private power is twofold. One is how far can they go? And you all will be talking about issues of extraterritoriality. And that's kind of interesting, but that's been talked to death and then resurrected and talked to death again without resolution. The more interesting one is where those norms get to be administered. In the European model, the norms are administered by a public techno-bureaucracy. In the UNGP model, certainly the second pillar, it was meant to be administered through hardened private lawmaking that takes its instructions from international public law as values, but then operates it and its disciplines within the market. That's the best I can do. And yeah, that's the ideal state. It gets really messy in real life. And that makes everyone crazy, which also means it's going to make the coders crazy. But that's what I got for you. The third question, thank you so much. Oh, the short answer is yes. And the longer answer is, can tech be more inclusive? Absolutely, but it depends on what inclusive means. If we're looking at one table, the dynamics of inclusion, that is, of the creation of a single converging imaginary or Lebenswelt, is going to be very different than if you have a fragmented universe. So in Colombia, for example, you've done Colombia. Let's talk about more inclusive tech. There's nothing that prevents the Colombians from creating spaces where tech can flourish in a contextually specific and culturally specific way. Where is it likely to come from? Not from the state or large private institutions. It's going to come from that 13-year-old girl in her mother's basement, and it's going to come from those areas outside of the mainstream of the big actors. New tech legitimacy. Thank you for bringing that up. That has been a problem for a long time. Language. We've got double language problems here. One, we're turning text to code and physical to virtual. But the other is, you're absolutely right. There's like a million zillion languages. Each of them are culturally embedded. And you're scraping in Colombia, Ecuador. The Ecuadorian mine situation was a particularly unfortunate one. You've got data scraping translated into English from either Spanish speaking or Spano-indigenous speaking culturally signified speeches, which then get blanded out, get placed into these global big data churning systems to produce impacts and the like, which may have absolutely nothing to do with the realities of the people on the ground. And yes, that's a problem. It's not clear that anyone is dealing with it. There's a little bit of language in the OECD. Paris has spent a little bit of time trying to deal with this. But at the end of the day, you're going to use the 5 UN languages. Mercifully, Spanish is one of them, but it doesn't help a whole lot of people. And that double translation problem, especially when you're dealing with different languages into English, let's say, or Russian or Chinese, and the cultural translation embedded within that, is going to have a profound impact on the terminology, much less where you've got incompatible systems based on religion and other things. Asymmetries of power, yeah, you've got it. One of the things the Latin Americans had been good at for a while, the old Calvo doctrine, was you're going to have to, the Latin Americans are going to have to rethink about the kinds of barriers they're going to put up. Porous barriers for interactions, but much harder barriers with respect to the extraterritorial projection of values, especially from the old colonial centers in Europe, and then the merchant colonial centers in the US, and now the Marxist-Leninist colonial centers in China. The last thing you're going to want is to become a virtual latifundia for the large imperial centers and their data tech armies. That's it.
Thanks, Larry. A very quick final by Blessing. If you can keep it really short, then we'll end
So
on this
when
one.
we started in the morning, we looked at Yogi's his whole background for starting the UNGP was to try to get a multi-stakeholders way of governance involving both the private and the public sector. So now you mentioned in your general trajectories on the construction of due diligence platform, and you said one of the things that will be driving it is the fact that political orders will be widening the scope of governmental transnational sphere through private sector. So my question is, obviously this gives the private sector some technological power. Would that not in turn widen the governance gap that we were trying to bridge with the UNGPs and all the regulations that we are creating? Because if they then have the power, then they then decide the rules and the ways that they're going to be regulated, rather than the public sector. Because even though the public sector brings up the policies,
but how the regulation is going to be complied with will be determined by the private sector. And we know that they are all limited in terms of extraterritoriality with the way international law works. So my question is, would the gap then be more widened as a result?
All right, very quickly. Brilliant, brilliant question. And that is, in fact, the nightmare of civil society. It's a nightmare. It's German civil society, some German civil society elements that I've talked to. I mean, this is kind of front and center. The notion is that you're the same reasons that civil society hated the second pillar in the UN, because what it effectively, they argued, and that gave rise to the movement towards the International Treaty on Business and Human Rights, the 10th session of which is coming up in October. The idea was that if you effectively vest corporations, however you do it, with the power to effectively determine both impacts and remediation, you've vested governmental power in the entities, and the state has now lost power. And that is certainly the case. And it's an argument that can be made very strongly in Europe by in this case, it would be again, the marriage of the public techno-bureaucracies and then their counterparts, their techno-bureaucracies within these large enterprises. And that is an issue. The UNGPs sought to mediate that by preserving in the state, in the first pillar, the ability to manage markets and therefore to avoid capture. It wasn't clear at the time. It is still not clear whether it will work or not. There was some talk, less so now than in the past, although you see a little bit of it in the directive, and that is to recognize in a special or distinct place for what are now called human rights defenders, but essentially a civil society space. That really hasn't gone very far. I think that the underlying, I read into as an underlying point of the question you made, the issue and really the deficiency of having recognized multinational enterprises as a player with respect to whom a diligence environment is required, whether public or private. We did not at the same time embed civil society organizations to the same degree as autonomous actors also embedded within diligence systems. And that is work to be done with its own peculiarities in the interpenetration of diligence and AI. And I'll stop there. I know time is short.
Wonderful. Thank you, Larry. It's clear to all of us that you would have the energy to continue for 3 more hours, but we've come to the end of a long day here already. So we'll really take a lot from your talk for the rest of the week. Thank you so much also for those joining on Zoom, and see all of you in some context soon.
And thank you all. Brilliant questions. Thank you for having me. And I'm sorry I'm not there in person.
Till soon.
Bye.
Not really a massive